Welcome to Business Class, a podcast for people wanting to upgrade their thinking, upgrade their learning, and upgrade their life. I'm your host, Eugenia Panderhos, founder of Business Class Collective, best-selling author, and life coach. If you're an entrepreneur, a startup, or someone who dreams of reaching their full potential, then you're in the right place. You'll feel empowered and inspired to design the life you've always wanted. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the show. I hope you're well. I'm feeling fabulous. Today is an absolutely gorgeous autumn day here in South Australia. The sun is shining, the birds are singing. It is truly beautiful. Last night I had a delightful dinner with a girlfriend and we went to an amazing Italian restaurant where we enjoyed the deliciousness of European flavours paired with beautiful wine from the Adelaide regions. It's great to take a moment and celebrate life and to celebrate friendship and to celebrate everything in between. As we know, life can become challenging, but we do need to stop and smell the roses and infuse our life with fun. And that's one of the things Adam reminds us of in his conversations as part of this interview series. I'm absolutely thrilled to be presenting the third episode of the trilogy, or should I say the final instalment of the epic conversation with the one and only Dr. Adam Fletcher, who will continue to inspire and influence us with his wisdom, his experience, and his tips for living a truly aligned and meaningful life. So, let's get started. So, Adam, we've just talked about how you stay motivated, but the other side of that is motivation is one thing, but mindset is really important too. So can you talk to me about mindset and what tips and tricks you adopt to keep your mindset focused, and how does that impact sleep and fatigue?
I mean, I have good and bad days like everyone, and I think that's probably the first acknowledgement because, we all have our own cycles and ups and downs. So I think you need to let yourself off the hook because we're all in that camp. I think it's also important to acknowledge that things like sleep really do influence our ability to be our optimal self. So that's pretty relevant to this topic, be it personal or work-related interests that you have here. When we're sleep deprived or otherwise suboptimal, for example, if we're working at night, we know 100% from research that changes people's capability in that moment to be big picture, to be high energy or whatever's optimal. And so we need to really give ourselves permission to be humans again, because that's simply the reality. And if people are working night shifts or early morning shifts or rotating shifts or long hours every week, or they're juggling significant demands like young children and full-time work, the truth of it is that there will be big ups and big downs. And so it's important for everyone to acknowledge that and work with that and be kind to ourselves when we know that we've been pushing it uphill and today is just one of those days I've got to get through before I can have a good recovery for a couple of days. So I think that's really important, but it's also important for managers and executives to appreciate that all of the people down the chain for them fit into that category too. And yes, you can have procedures that you have to follow, and yes, you can have, monitoring and standards and thresholds and all those things. But when the pressure's really on, people are going to be stretched, and their ability to do more than that is possibly too much to ask sometimes, especially if you're expecting everyone to be chirpy and upbeat and et cetera. It's perhaps not realistic in a lot of the environments that are relevant to what we're talking about. So, I think that's mainly it, just acknowledging reality and working with reality rather than assuming or expecting we can be upbeat and at the top of our game and have the best mindset all day, every day, especially if you're working shift work or juggling lots of complex life demands.
Yeah, mindset. So, it's the ability to see things and act with your executive mind and be strategic and enable yourself to become your best person. And we're not always going to be that person. There's going to be other influences. My dad, who worked as a shift worker, my mum was onto food and nutrition for Dad. She would make things particularly for his cycle, and he was always very grateful for that. Something that really enabled him to function at a high level because of good nutrition and hydration and getting sun and exercise. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I think we're only really just starting to catch up on that level of fine tuning and support and maintenance. As was mentioned earlier on in the discussion, things like getting full spectrum light into our eyes and onto our skin, we're only really just starting to discover that to the point where we're bringing it into more mainstream discussions. You know, I'm learning all the time. I've very recently learned that, for example, the sort of intense red light that you get in the middle of the day if the sun's out, I only just found out through listening to a brain surgeon, Dr. Jack Cruz, about the fact that that red light penetrates the skull and actually gets captured and goes quite deep into the brain. And, you know, up until quite recently, I would have thought, wow, I thought the sun would just get stopped at the skull, for example. But no, the human body's developed. And in fact, the brain folds, the structure of the brain and the way it's folded actually captures and moves light through the brain. So they're like little sinks, little funnels. The folds are like little funnels that move the light into different parts of the brain. That's how it's evolved to be like that and why it's evolved to be like that. I mean, that was just an incredible piece of information for me personally, learning that recently. And so I think there's a lot we don't know. I think there's a lot we're catching up on in terms of science and medicine and to try and get us closer to the truth. And there's a lot of things I'm only just, very recently discovering in terms of things like that and quantum biology and other things that we're really only just scraping the surface on. And so I think that in my experience, personally and professionally, and with my observations of people, there's 100% certainty in my mind that these bigger picture things like purity of water, staying hydrated, not having toxins like pesticides, herbicides, growth hormones, seed oils, hormones in our food, making sure you're getting full spectrum light on your skin and in your eyes. Like, I've got absolutely no doubt that, coupling that with grounding while you're sleeping, staying away from electromagnetic networks as fully as possible, including when you're sleeping. No doubt in my mind that these are massive differences, massive differences, like orders of magnitude difference in terms of health, in terms of capacity to have mindset and have energy and motivation, be productive, maintain awareness of strategy and action at the same time, maintain a care for people as well as the business and the profits at the same time. Like, no doubt in my mind. But I do feel like the science is a lagging indicator, the medicine's a lagging indicator. And so, it's important people do their own work, practice these things and lean into seeing what might change if they change their environment, if they change their behaviours and practices, and just run it as an experiment and see if you feel better, see if you feel healthier. Because a lot of these things are interconnected. And so, improving inflammation by sleeping on a grounding sheet or something might miraculously improve a pain condition or an arthritic condition, for example. And that can be life-changing for some people. Or getting a sleep disorder treated can be life-changing for people's energy and motivation and safety. So they're all interconnected. And mindset is what emerges when all the other pieces have probably lined up. And so your dad was very fortunate to have your mum having that level of awareness and support and care to help him be as optimal as possible when he was doing shift work. I'm sure he was very grateful for it, as he said.
Oh, he always praised her, always. publicly, privately. And you was a lucky man. And I suppose that brings us to the things that you mentioned that people can do. They're readily available to each and every one of them, like getting out in the sun, all of that, switching the Wi-Fi off. We can all do that as part of our everyday. So that actionable things that people can actually start to adopt and see if it does make a difference. Adam, who's been your biggest inspiration?
I was very fortunate, particularly when I was at high school. I had some really powerful role models that really helped me find healthy boundaries and maintain motivation and see that if I worked hard at things that I'd get results. Some of those were in sport, in terms of like karate senseis, tennis coach. Some were teachers, and it was more about academic pursuits and results. But I was very, very fortunate to be supported by really awesome adults and inspirational leaders when I was a younger person. Also, having come from a less economically fortunate background, I was really also fortunate to be given grants and small amounts of money and basically have my way paid for into things like maths competitions and science camps and things like that. Organisations like the Lions and Rotary were, really generous to help me be able to go and participate in things that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford to participate in. And so I think that created a sense of community and a bigger sense of support beyond my immediate family and school environment and sporting environment and things like that. So I feel like that was all very pivotal for me in my early development, even though I probably wasn't aware of all that level of detail that I just articulated at the time, of course. Through my personal and professional development, I was really fortunate to have some really powerful and effective mentors as well. To rattle off a few names, Don Adlam, Drew Dawson, Tom Balkan, and also a lot of friends that were very supportive, challenging, and inspirational in their own ways. A dear friend of mine, Cass, fits that and ticks the box. My mum, my sister Nicole. And so, and you as well. You're definitely on that list. I'm very grateful to be able to have had such a solid, dependable, trustworthy co-pilot in so much of what I did. It's definitely needing a village to raise a child and an adult sometimes. I'm very grateful for you and very grateful for, all those people. It all made the biggest difference.
It's amazing. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for that. But it's amazing to acknowledge the people that have contributed to our life and to stop and reflect and be grateful because we are with some of those people. They've influenced us in a way that made our life more meaningful, more productive, more joyous and challenging all at the same time. You get the ones that push your boundaries, they push you and, you grow in those situations, and you get the ones that support you, and it's wonderful.
Absolutely. No, I've been very blessed, and it's never lost on me how fortunate I've been. And on many layers, I mean, even just being born into a relatively safe Western country like Australia. I mean, if you want to talk about the lottery of life, even though there's lots of challenges and criticisms I could make about Australia, like by and large, it's an incredible piece of luck to be born in Australia and be brought up in Australia as a general rule. There's billions of other people who just by their place of birth and the time of their birth are way worse off than me. And so, that was never lost on me either. And I feel like, I've been very fortunate to just have won that lottery and also won the lottery of the people that have been around me and the people that have had patience with me and the people that have shared wisdom and ways of thinking with me. Given me the opportunity to, hold those bigger pictures and contribute to, academic knowledge, practical knowledge, organisational safety and culture all of that is a combination of all of those people contributing to me and more broadly.
That's fantastic. How do you celebrate your wins?
How do I celebrate my wins? Well, I never was very good at that for a long time. I was always focused on the future and driving forward. I think I got better at it in the last decade compared to the first. Yeah, you know that too. There's two parts to my answer. One is simply just being kind and compassionate and gentle with myself, like giving myself permission to take my foot off the accelerator when a milestone or an achievement has been delivered, rather than just jumping immediately onto the next big push, the next big goal, the next big deliverable. I've gotten much better at realizing it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so that's my personal answer. But I also think externally to that, I've gotten much better at making sure that there are like team or project celebrations, like dinners or just a drink at the bar or whatever it might be, just to really put a flag in it and acknowledge everyone who's contributed and acknowledge the result and rest in the success of whatever that was. And so that was something I had to learn. It wasn't naturally in me. And glad to say I've learned that one. And I think we've done a great job of celebrating our successes. And I've done a great job of celebrating my personal successes, over the last 5 to 10 years, way better than the 10 or 20 years before that.
Yeah, it's funny. I think as you get a little bit older, you realize the value of personal successes, and it's lovely just to bask in them for a moment, have a little, as you say, rest in them, because it's very easy to go to the next thing, to the next shiny object, and not actually feel the gratitude within your heart that you have the privilege of achieving that. And I think it is a privilege. I think we live in this amazing country. We have amazing choices. We're safe, and we can all get caught up in our own head, in our mindset, in our busyness. But to actually sit with gratitude for anything and anyone in our life or achieving something is important.
Definitely. And there's a kindness to it, as I said, but there's also it's also a future capacity creator, to take that pause, to take that rest, to do a reset. It creates the conditions for the optimal future rather than pushing yourself suboptimally into the next bit. And to me, that's really important too, because if we want our results to be excellent and not just sufficient, and we want to be really proud that we did the best and got the best, we need to be prepared. We need to start from a great place, not just a half awake, dragging my feet, need to catch up on sleep place. Practically and metaphorically, they're true. And so to me, that's really important too. It's about protecting the future greatnesses by doing a proper reset, doing a proper celebration, and sort of gathering for what comes next, because there's always a next, either by our own making or external forces. And I certainly want to keep doing the best I can do. And part of that is protecting my own health, because if we don't have our health, we're not optimal. You can have all the money in the world or all the time in the world, but if you don't have your health, you don't get to optimally use those other resources. So I think that's become a big awareness for me too. And so it's about having that longer sense of time and preparing for the biggest, longest version of the campaign rather than the small win, quick win.
There's a reverence in that, Adam, holding space for that. The reverence and the appreciation, and then the pause, moving forward. And you're right, bringing your best self to that next, whatever it is. Is there a particular book or books that have influenced your thinking and your mindset?
I think it really depended on my stage of development. In the early days of my studies and career, I was very focused on objective science and measurement of objective science. So I was really swayed by that. And it wasn't until I really got richer in my understanding of sleep that I realized it wasn't all about objective, measurable, easily measurable stuff, and that we had to have completely different ways of looking at psychology and subjectives and intangibles, and that they're equally important, but way harder to measure, way harder to manipulate them away as not important societally and professionally. And then, of course, personally, there were realms even beyond that in terms of really understanding the more ethereal, all the time and space concepts, and even concepts of borders between places and demarcations between jobs in organizations. I had to really rest in a lot of this much higher order systems thinking and the influences that exist in the world. And I feel like it's harder in the workplace because we need more rules and structure and boundaries, but at least in society, my experience has led me to become more and more aligned with ancestral ways of thinking and acting and moving and eating and sleeping, because I realised that we can't evolve very fast. We haven't even evolved to the electric light bulb, which is not that old, 100 and something years old. We're not even close to evolving to factor that in from a biological perspective. So, we're just not going to evolve. So it's better we match what we know is optimal and we knows what we evolved to. And it's not saying every single thing all of our ancestors did were great and that we should emulate that, because there's some horrible chapters in history because of things our ancestors did, in really broad terms, in terms of poisoning waterways for personal gain, or using slavery, or, having brutality against neighbouring tribes. Like, I'm not advocating for any of that, but in terms of being harmonious with clean water, clean food, sunlight, cycles of sleep, seasons, that's become much more powerful in terms of my understanding and how we should be ideally behaving. And it takes something. You've really got to be aware of that, and you've got to incrementally lean more and more into it, not so much so that you bite off more than you can chew and get overwhelmed. It interrelates to it as well.
And when we talk about the sun, what about the moon? What about moonlight? Like when we come into a full moon and it's light, there's more light at night time. Does that interfere with sleep?
Question I wouldn't claim to really know an answer to in a deep way. I'm sure there are people who could answer that quite definitively. Certainly low levels of light at night, we know for sure the body can detect it, for sure. Lights from the city or from the moon, there's no question that that's something that can influence us if we don't have, complete block out blinds or curtains or things. What effect it has is, there's probably many answers to that. I suspect the moon perhaps lets us know seasonally or cyclically, where we should be in our cycles, or something else related to that. But yeah, I wouldn't claim to really have a deep answer to that. I think we've got our training wheels on with questions like that and being able to answer questions like that. I don't doubt that they're important, but I don't at this point claim to have any great answer for you, comprehensive answer for you.
Yeah, because I plant by the new moon and harvest by the full moon. So there's that cycle. And and I know, like, in the evenings, I like to have my lamp on. I switch all the other lights off, and children come home, they put one of the overhead lights on. I'm like, no, because I like the dim lights at night time.
Yeah, I'm the same. I've got red lights that I use at night if no one's around, or if it's just my daughter and I here. I, often use the red lights and just get rid of all the blue and brighter stuff. And yeah, there's probably less of an issue with things like campfire light, candlelight, and things like that, partly because of intensity, but partly because of the spectrum of it as well. But I think that's kind of unusual in our society, but it's actually more natural, and it's how we've spent more of our lives as a species. We just have a recency bias because we know what life's like now. But even 200 years ago, there were no incandescent lights.
I remember a scene from Downton Abbey when they went from oil lamps to electricity, and the grandmother in this series took out her fan and protected herself from, from this light that was beaming down from the sea.
Yeah.
And it made me chuckle, but I thought it would have been a real reaction to have the overhead lights all of a sudden right on top of you. It would have been so
Absolutely
counterintuitive. So again, with the oil lamps, you could adjust how much flame there was, how much light there was going to be. It's a softer light.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, also it opened up other possibilities for society that were very valuable from some perspectives, but very disruptive from others. So, all of a sudden, Henry Ford could have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week plant, whereas before, 24-hour work or night shift type work was quite limited. There was only stuff you could do with oil lamps and things like that, guards in an army or for a city, some degree of healthcare, but not lots. But the majority of things, no, they just weren't possible. And so, yeah, certainly moving out of that more natural and connected to nature, moon and sun type work, like your Rudolf Steiner kind of approach, which is related to what you were saying you do, into that more Henry Ford approach. I mean, it was a stupid level of shock, like from a human perspective, biologically, societally. And yes, you can argue there are and were benefits, but yeah, let's not underestimate the shocking change that was to our biology and everything else.
I've been trying to catch up ever since, I think.
Well, we still are. I mean, when I've spoken to leaders of villages in remote jungles in Kalimantan about the desirability or otherwise for the members of that village to potentially take on roles in a 24-hour rotating shift work roster in the mine that's going to be opening up the road. I've seen it firsthand. It's completely foreign. It's a completely different skill set. It requires different types of supports in the bedroom, in the home, in the family, in the society, in the organisation. And it's not simple. It can be done well, but it's not simple. It's hard to fill that gap. That's when that gap's so big, when it's happening in a society for the first time in that society's experience.
And that society's probably been living harmoniously with nature and the cycles and social structures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of them also had FOMO because they'd see stuff on TV or someone would show them something on the internet, and they, like many of the rest of us, they had FOMO about these, shiny lifestyles and shiny objects. But of course, anyone who's been around long enough sees the downsides and the follies of that, and also sees that we often get tricked and duped by the marketing and the advertising and the statements of fact that aren't true and things like that. So, I think in a lot of cases, those cultures got dragged into the future quite blindly.
Would you be able to explain what else people can do personally to support good sleep, health, and their energy levels?
I definitely encourage people to, if it's within your means, to get a grounding or earthing sheet for your bed. That's made a big difference to me. Turn off your Wi-Fi and get basically as much of your electrical system away from your bed as possible. Ideally 4 or 5 meters, if not more. And if it's stuff that's going to penetrate beyond that, like Wi-Fi, just turn it off at night. You can put it on a timer. You don't even need to physically turn it on and off. You can just get a wall timer that'll turn it off. But yeah, I also think it's really important for people to set their aims to change at the right level for them. So start small and incrementally build up. But I mean, it's so simple, but we're not doing it so much of the time in our societies. But if food's got a label on it, it's further away from being real food than alternatives. And if a food's got 70 ingredients on it, you shouldn't eat it. 100% it's going to have emulsifiers that'll mess with your digestion. It'll have preservatives. It'll have seed oils that are hugely disruptive. I mean, you're guaranteed to have horrible things. So, you want unprocessed food. You want food that's free of toxins. You want water that's clean. You want to be grounding as much as you can. You want to be getting sunlight in a healthy range. The demonization of all sunlight really isn't true. I don't know who's profiting from that being a narrative in our society, certainly in Australia, probably globally, but it's just not. It's not true from a biological perspective, from an evolutionary perspective. Many of our systems are optimized with light, not without light. As a subset of that, vitamin D is essential to hundreds and hundreds of things in our body, and that's related to getting light in most latitudes and longitudes. And so, if you want to go a bit deeper than the basics of, the water, light, grounding, sleep, stress management, then, you probably want to be getting blood work done and seeing if you've got any micronutrient deficiencies or hormonal issues that perhaps can be more specifically looked at for yourself. And that's not medical advice because I'm not your doctor, whoever's listening. But from a personal perspective, that's been valuable for me. It gives me the ability to channel my resources into things that are going to make a difference rather than just scattergunning or shotgunning ideas and good intentions. And, having good practices and prioritising your own health, be that with giving yourself permission to go and have fun riding your bike, or having a meditation practice to get some silence away from the crazy world, or having walks in nature, or whatever it might be. But start small, incrementally go up, and just be kind to yourself and don't overload yourself. But do it. Don't keep making excuses if you have been.
It's all in the action, taking action and backing yourself, knowing that you're the one that's going to benefit from implementing these changes in the lifestyle that you live.
And having agency, as you said before, just being responsible for your own health, being responsible for your own life, which means in many ways working against forces and pressure that comes from governments, corporates, etc., that are heavily influencing us, whether we like it or not, in this day and age. It's about having that agency to choose my own health and my own family, my own well-being and my own safety, as the priority, not just blindly being pushed around by the forces that exist and do heavily influence what we see and read and hear and can do.
It's really important what we see and hear, as well as diet, nutrition and everything else, because it all plays in.
Yeah.
I'll give you an interesting story. Each year I go for my blood test, and it's usually in December. And I made my appointment, and because I don't regularly go to the doctor, I enjoy good health, I was told I had to come in for a longer appointment so they could see me. It wasn't good enough. They needed to see me. They needed to have a different discussion with me. And I just thought that was probably something different to the norm,
Yeah.
I'd rather know ahead of time and try and do something if I can rather than backpedal.
Broadly speaking, our entire Western medical system is centred around pathology and disease. It has no place for preventative work and maintenance. And in fact, generally money's not available for you to be doing preventative stuff or even maintaining stuff. Maybe there's some exceptions to that, like regular dental work or whatever, but by and large, it's a system that revolves completely around pathology and treatment of pathology through various means, be that chemical, radiation, cutting things out, whatever you do, it's all pathology management, disease-centric, and lots of money involved and lots of profits involved in keeping it that way. So I think, there's some pretty cool movements around decentralised health and decentralised healthcare. People can learn about that and find out about how to not be part of that sausage machine, because it's optimised around having sick people and responding to that and making money from that, rather than keeping people optimally healthy in a proactive way to prevent disease.
You just hit the nail on the head, Adam, because the results that you get through your blood work, as an example, is the results are in the normal range. But normal range isn't optimal range.
Oh, quite often normals, they're very unhealthy.
Very unhealthy. You'd have an integrated health doctor as well to be looking at your work to give you the advice that you really need.
I do, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Time to thank you for your time. It has been wonderful to have you on the show, Adam, and to share your wisdom and knowledge and expertise and your personality and life stories.
It's enjoyable for me too.
Our listeners have some valuable take-home tips that they can implement straight away. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Jenny. Appreciate it. Bye.
You've been listening to Business Class presented by Eugenia Panterhos, founder of Business Class Collective. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, subscribe, rate and review this podcast. Share the love and let your family and friends know too. You can follow Business Class Collective on Instagram and Facebook. Join me next time.